Hey guys, what's up? It's Spencer from the editing room here. I just wanted to make a quick note to this episode before it gets going for you. We had a fantastic chat with Ronald Malfi. He's one of my favorite horror thriller writers, and it was a really great time to just sit down with him and get to chat with him and pick his brain. And he had a lot of really awesome things to say about just writing in general and how he thinks about his books and how he plans them out and whatnot. However, we did have some pretty serious audio issues, and I have done everything I can to fix this. I've tried to put it through audio enhancer programs. I've tried about everything that you can possibly try in Premiere, and a lot of it is making the audio worse. And so it's really unfortunate because this episode is such a good one. I think the conversations are absolutely amazing, and we had a blast hanging out with Ronald Malfi. But I did just want to let you guys know ahead of time, this isn't our usual audio that we put out. It's going to be a little clunky, and there's going to be some things that just get missed. And basically, it's the internet at work, right? And not everybody has a microphone when they come on to be a guest with us. Some people have to use either the laptop microphone or headphone, like the earbuds microphone, stuff like that. So that's kind of what we're working with for this episode. So I just wanted to let you guys know ahead of time. I would really appreciate if you watched this episode and tried to get through some of the audio hiccups that we had, because I really do think that this is a fantastic discussion with an amazing author. And if you haven't read Ronald Malfi's works, I highly recommend you do, especially books like Bone White or Black Mouth, The Night Parade. All of those are fantastic. We have reviews for, I think, Bone White and Night Parade on our channel, so feel free to check those out if you'd like some more information. I'll talk about this more in the episode. I really just want to let you guys know about the audio, and this isn't usually what our audio sounds like, but I really hope you guys enjoy this discussion because it is a ton of fun and there was some really good stuff in there. So enjoy. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files podcast, the podcast that takes up hours of your life that you will never ever get back. We are your co-hosts, Spencer and Gabe, and today we're joined by horror author Ronald Malfi. You may know him from his works such as Come With Me, Bone White, or Black Mouth. For the record, if you're watching this now and haven't read any of those, then I highly recommend that you do. We actually have reviews on our channel for both Bone White and The Night Parade, so give those a watch if you're curious about some of his books. But yeah, we'll introduce him properly in just a moment, but a little bit of housekeeping. A quick reminder that if you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so on Twitter or Discord, both of which are linked down in our description. We love chatting with you guys, and our DMs are open. You can always send us a message and chat with us over there. If you'd like to support us, you can do so on Patreon. We actually have this episode going up on Patreon as we record it. So if you support us at the $6 tier and above, you can watch all of these episodes as they're being recorded and see them sometimes a month before the guys over on YouTube get to see them. So Patreon, we're trying to bring some more value to that, and we would love it if you guys would support us that way. But if you can't do that, that's no problem. Just subscribing here on YouTube is fantastic and really helps us out more than you could ever know. That and liking the video, that all helps us with the algorithm, helps us to get seen by more people. My last bit of housekeeping here is an update on Tim Hardy's Kickstarter. And this was a great thing that I got to do a few weeks ago, where independent author Tim Hardy, he wanted to get an audiobook made for his novel Hall of Bones, and he put on a Kickstarter to get the audiobook funded, and we got it funded. It was so awesome. He came on here for a live stream, like I said, a few weeks ago, and we got to tell people about the Kickstarter. And just yesterday, as of the day of this recording on the April 7th, it fully funded yesterday. So we are super excited about that. A big congratulations to Tim Hardy. I'm super excited to listen to your audiobook now that it's funded, and whenever it gets made, it'll be a great time. So big congrats to him. There was also, Gabe, I don't know if I told you about this, but there's a reward in that Kickstarter where one of the things that you could add on was a narration from R.J. Bailey. So I
Oh,
added
cool.
that on, and I can write whatever I want and have R.J. Bailey narrate it up to, I think it's like 2,000 words or something.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and
That's
so
cool.
Holly Tinsley and I got together, and
Good.
we're gonna write a fan fiction about R.J. Bailey and Edward Cullen and their sordid romance, and
That's awesome.
we're gonna make him read it.
That's awesome.
It's gonna be so fantastic. So I was super excited for that little add-on to the
Yeah,
Kickstarter.
that's really cool.
But that is not what we're here to chat about today. We are here with Ronald Malfi, an author that I found sometime last year. And I started with Bone White and I got into it, and then I just binged so many of his works. And I told Gabe, I'm like, you got to read these. And so Gabe read a bunch of them. And so we love this guy's books. Welcome to the show, Ronald Malfi.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I appreciate it. It's great.
For sure. Well, yeah, like I said, I started with Bone White and found you that way. Your books had been recommended to me over on Reddit. I had been doing some digging, trying to get into horror, because Gabe and I primarily read like fantasy and sci-fi. And then over the past like year and a half, we've been trying to get more into horror, and Bone White was the thing that got
Yep.
recommended to me. I quickly fell in love with it and just started reading the rest of your stuff. No, I haven't read all of it, but I've read a lot of it. So do you want to talk about, like, if our viewers may not be familiar with your work, do you want to talk a little bit about who you are and what kind of books you write?
Yeah, sure. Um, I'm probably as fantasy as those lights in the ceiling right now. I'm a horror writer. My stuff tends to walk the line between horror, thriller, mystery, suspense, that kind of, um, for avid horror readers, I'll read my stuff and go, wow, that's more suspense and thriller than horror. And then for thriller writers or thriller readers, I'll read my stuff and go, that's more horror than thriller, which I love. I love kind of being this kind of, I don't know, literary ambiguous thing that just kind of straddles a line. But that's
Yeah,
become sort of what I do.
Sweet.
No, it's fun. Yeah,
that's great.
it keeps it fresh.
Yeah, yeah, I've been trying to figure out. I'm like, do I call him a horror author or do I call him like a thriller author? And I feel like you're exactly right. There's kind of a mix of those two things. I'm a big fan of Dean Koontz. And so when I was reading things like Bone White or The Night Parade, those very much reminded me of something that like Dean Koontz would do, but like with more of a horror twist on them. Um, and so I don't know. Have you read a lot of Dean Koontz? Are you a fan?
Um, I have read a lot of Dean Koontz when I was younger. I did a lot of comparisons to Dean Koontz for my novel Snow, which I guess is similar to his book Phantoms. People have said to me.
Oh, okay.
Early Dean Koontz I was into. I mean, I can't say when the last time was that I read a Dean Koontz novel lately. Um,
Right.
but no, I mean, hey, look, I'll take. It's a good comparison to have. So
Yeah.
he's selling
Yeah,
books.
yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
Totally.
Well, at the top of the show, maybe we can do a little bit of promotional stuff. You have a book coming up this summer called Small Town Horror. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so it's my next book coming out. It comes out in June, and this is a story about a group of friends that have carried a hidden secret of this tragic event that occurred to them when they were younger. They've carried it into adulthood, and now the seams are coming apart. Everything's breaking down, and they've got to kind of circle the wagons and figure out how they're going to keep this secret still a secret. And it's got all the touchstones of different horror elements and stuff like that in there as well. But like most of my stuff, it's very heavily influenced by atmosphere and character and all the stuff that I enjoy writing. And I think if people like my book Black Mouth, I kind of consider this one to be a sister novel, sort of a companion piece to that book, where
Okay.
I look at Black Mouth as being a novel where it's sort of like what happens to a group of kids when they're basically manipulated by someone and they're innocent and they cause problems. Whereas Small Town Horror looks at a group of kids who are guilty of causing problems and not so innocent. I kind of like that dichotomy.
Okay.
It's sort of the photo negatives of each other. So it was fun to write.
Sweet.
Okay, I love that because
sounds awesome.
With Blackmouth, I loved like kind of seeing all this stuff that happened to them when they were kids, and then you get them later when they all come together and you see like how all of them have been affected by the past and what they're still carrying with them, and the kind of things they bring to the group dynamic in the future as opposed to when they were kids. Will we see that same kind of time jump thing going where we're seeing this group of friends as kids and then kind of the trauma later on?
Yeah, for sure. That's really what appeals to me most as a writer. I'm less interested in monsters and ghosts as I am interested in characters who feel burdened by monsters and ghosts. And that's really what kind of interests me. So I love to take that sort of ideology of these characters as children and what has transpired there in their youth to affect them as adults and show that sort of development as to who they are. I'm a very character driven writer. I don't outline my plots. I'm not a plot writer. I like to let these characters kind of breathe on the page and do their own thing. And it's fucked me over a couple times in the past not having an outline, but still, I feel like the outcome is fairly more organic doing it that way, and I have more enjoyment writing it that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I love the way your character, like you said, it's not a lot of your stories aren't so focused on the monster or like the big evil. It's these characters that are in these situations that are being affected by them. Like even Paul in Bone White.
Yep.
You get very little time with the actual monsters that are out there. You're mostly focused on him and like this slowly deteriorating innocence to like this town and what is out there in the woods, and by the end you just get full blown, like his world is completely shook by the end of it. And I think that's one of the things that I loved about that book.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is, these are character stories where I set them against the backdrop of the horror genre. Like I use the horror tropes as window dressing a little bit to tell a character piece. That's how I approach them. And for me, it rings a little truer than just going 110% into boogeyman territory. I really like spend my time with the characters, and I use those elements of the genre selectively as I tell the story.
Yeah, definitely. They're very subtle in a way that it feels real. Like if this were an actual situation, it feels like this is kind of how it would transpire and how it would be presented, and all of the characters feel very real. They all feel like they have their own motivations for things. I could talk about so many characters in Bone White that just gave me just the creeps, but also you knew that they had their own intentions, their own motives. Like everybody was kind of, there was like one big secret that people were, working to keep, but each person had a very unique personality to them. And I feel like in a lot of horror books, it can be easy to, like, in any other horror book in like a small town, like all of those characters would kind of feel the same, like they would just feel like the townspeople. But in a book like Bone White, the tow truck guy, the deputy, like all of these people have very distinct personalities, and they're kind of they're you're playing with those personalities within this trope of like a small town that is keeping a secret.
Yeah, I mean, the horror elements by themselves are really throwaway items unless they are attributed to actual believable characters, and that's really the hallmark of really any good story. You got to believe in the characters, you got to relate to them. You don't necessarily have to like them, but you have to understand what their motivations are. And once you have that kind of symbiotic relationship between the character and the reader, or the character and the viewer, if it's a movie, those horror elements that you add then have more of an impact because you have some accessibility to these people. You have an understanding of where they come from. It's not just horror for horror's sake. You're building a literary Ponzi scheme, right? To sort of entice and suck your readership in to buy into this before you hit them with the whammy, right? And that's right. How I look at it.
It's awesome.
Exactly.
Not that I'm going to steal your money like Madoff or anything. But
Which ones did you reread this week, Gabe? Because I saw you read Bone White this week, right?
Yeah, that was the only one I was able to reread was Bone White.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Just didn't have enough time during the week.
Do you have any questions from, like, no spoilers?
Classic
yeah. No, I don't think I have any questions. I think what he just said was kind of, I mean, you guys just said it. It's all about the characters, and I think that is something that, and again, it's been a while. I think I've read Black Mouth, right? Because we did an episode on that. That I definitely need to reread. Because I was even looking, I was like, what was this about? It's been a little while.
Yeah, that was the one about the kids where they like grow up and there's like this like circus or carnival that comes to town, and there's a magician that kind of keeps taking them out into the woods, and he's like, I'll show you how to do magic, and they kind of get sucked into like this little kind of cult following kind of thing. And then
I remember parts of it. I just know I need to reread it, but I mean, that
was a great one.
Yeah, and Bone White is awesome, man. I was riveted the entire time, probably more so in the second read through. Yeah, I would say. But I was at work and I was just, I'd have to set down the tools for a second and just soak up, this moment that's happening right now, right, with Paul or it was awesome.
Good deal. I appreciate it. Yeah. No.
Well, I wanted to ask, I'm sure this is a question that you get a lot, but I haven't heard the answer to it. How did you get into writing horror or thriller, and what made you choose that genre over writing in another genre? Was horror this thing that you were always kind of drawn to when you started?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to that. One is yes. I don't think you actually choose the genre you're in. I think that I was just always attracted to the darker elements in stories. It's the stuff I read. Those were the movies I watched when I was a kid. So it was natural for me to kind of write that stuff when I got older. And the other, the second part of that is I kind of half jokingly say that these all kind of start off as love stories. These are all really relationship stories, whether it's Bone White between a love of a brother to his other brother, whether it's a book like Come With Me, where it's a husband to his wife, or and I really hone in on those aspects of it. So those stories turn dark and they can be called horror novels, but there is a really strong foundation for relationship elements and you know, if you want to use the romance trope broadly, all of those stories start off that way. This was a question that I did a book signing many, many years ago where my extremely elderly grandmother attended and stood up in the back with the first question of the night, raised her hand and said, "Why don't you write something nice?" Right? And my response was, they all start off that way. They all try to be nice.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. They take a turn at some point, and that's where we are. But yeah. So I don't think
That's so funny.
I don't actively, consciously choose it. It's sort of what exists, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. That's so true. I was reading We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone this week. And if for anybody that doesn't know, it's there was 15 short stories in this book, and in the audiobook each one is like 30 minutes to an hour long or something. And the first one, it starts off it starts off with one of just the craziest twists. Would it be okay to spoil the first story? It's literally like a 15-minute story at the beginning, but I think it's such a good example.
Sure. It depends what your listenership is. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So
you just gotta tell them, listen, the next 15 minutes, don't listen if you want to hear this first story, okay?
Yeah, it's just one of the craziest twists. The first short story in that collection is this wife who's at home, and she's getting a dinner ready for these guests that her husband is going to bring home from work, and he's trying to get a promotion and all this stuff. She's trying to make sure everything's perfect, but she's got this crazy paranoia about her. She keeps seeing people outside the windows and all these things in the shadows and stuff, and she's just really, really paranoid. And so you see throughout the short story that she's getting very distracted. She'll be oh, I forgot to do this. And she's kind of running around, and she's getting this ham in the oven ready. She's trying to cook this ham, and the whole time she's got a baby on her hip, and she's kind of running around with the kid. And then at some point she puts the kid down to bed as, these guests are coming. And the guests come in, and she greets them. She's like, "Oh, hi," all this stuff. And they're like, "Oh, we would love to meet your baby daughter or son." I forget what it was. But we'd love to meet your kid. And so the husband is like, "Oh, yeah, I'll go get her." And he goes to run up the stairs. And he comes down, and all it says at the end is everybody had this horrified look on their face. And it had been talking about this crazy smell that was permeating the house and was making her want to puke. And everybody has this horror-stricken look on their face, and the husband is at the top of the stairs with a ham in his arms.
Oh no!
And she had put the kid in the oven.
Oh man!
It was, and the stories just get crazier from there. They just get wild from there. And there was some where I'm like, dang, these are dark, dude.
That story. So I'm not a big fan of public readings. I think we're all adults. We know how to read. I read to my kids. That's what I read to. But
sure.
But when I do public readings, I will read that dinner party story, because the ending of it, I just love the look on the audience's face, because like you said,
totally.
The last sentence, you have to. It's like a good joke. You have to. It's one step separated from what you're saying. Something he comes down with a ham, or it's either a ham or a pot roast, and he's in the baby blanket, and then the oven bell goes off, and you're like, oh fuck, and it's like that. It's sort of like a grenade. It takes a minute before the audience goes, oh
and then
shit,
yeah. That's awesome.
It's almost it's almost like a really, really dark punchline,
totally.
like a perfect ending to a joke or something, but it's just.
That's exactly how I see short. That's exactly how I see short fiction. I think of it. I think it is sort of like a joke. You put the build up.
Yeah.
You've got solid punchline to it. And I'm not,
Yep.
I've written a lot of short stories. I don't consider myself a really good short story writer because I think in those terms. So it's either the short stories are too packed and they read full, or they're so ambiguous, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, my readers get lost. I'm much more comfortable in doing a longer novel. So I'm really envious of people who can do really good short stories. Josh Mallerman is fantastic in his short fiction. Philip Fracassi, Rebecca Rowland, Joyce Carol Oates. I mean, you read these stories, and they just get it. They get the beats. They get the sensibility of what they're doing.
Yeah.
I find that very difficult in short fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that'd be the case. Thinking, from writing long form novels, normal novel length, to something that is just a couple pages, trying to pack an entire story into that would be crazy difficult.
Yeah. Well, and it's in the long form. I mean, I can step on my dick a little bit more in a novel. In a short story, I gotta really be cognizant of what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally.
Page, and not make it sound like I'm conscious of it. That's a very hard trick.
Sounds
to pull
like
off.
that would be difficult.
Paul Tremblay is another one. Paul Tremblay is fantastic at short fiction too. All those guys. I admire the skill that it takes to do that well.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I loved the two that I've read by you for your collections are We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone and Ghost Written, and I really, really enjoyed both of them. I think I saw them as a little bit different, where We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone is like these short stories that they have almost like a double twist at the end. Like every time I would listen to one of the stories in We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone, it was like about 3/4 of the way through, I would think that I knew what the twist was going to be, and then it would go another way and be something completely different and be like, oh. And so those were really cool, just like fun, twisty stories that were almost like, they kind of reminded me of when you guys were younger. Did you ever have the book that was like, it wasn't like grim fairy tales, but it was like horror stories for kids, kind of? And
do you mean like
there was the one about the girl that had the thing around her neck, like the scarf, and then it talks about her and her husband. She always wore this scarf, and then at the end they like took it off and her head fell off. Those kind of stories. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you go into those things kind of with one idea of what I recognize that I'm telling it one way, and then I want to kind of throw the audience and sort of twist them in a different direction. And those are, that collection of short stories was a collection of things that I had published over a period of almost a decade. So they came out different times and different publications, magazines, anthologies and whatever, and I just compiled them for that collection. Ghost Written was a completely different animal. And actually, I consider Ghost Written to be a novel. It was marketed as 4 novellas, but I like because they're all kind of interlinked, and they tell, if you read them in order and you read them together, they tell a larger tapestry of a story than just reading them by themselves as novellas. So I kind of I look at it more as a novel.
They were all in the same. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, in the same universe. There's some characters that overlap, and I like the idea. I mean, I think in two of the novellas, it's like I was specific about the actions of one character interfering with the actions of another character in a different novella. It all kind of plays out that way. And I like the metaphysical aspect of writing a book about books, but I'm also the narrator of this book telling you, think broader about the books you're reading, right?
Yeah.
So I like that play. Yeah. So that is cool. And I had a lot of fun with that book. It was a really neat. It was suggested by my editor. I had written a book called Come With Me, which is a pretty heavy novel. A lot of they call it, I guess, to writing Black Mouth, which deals with childhood trauma and alcoholism, addiction, all that stuff. There's some heavy themes there. So in the middle of writing those two books, I wrote one of the novellas for Ghostwritten as sort of like a palate cleanser, just to have fun with it, right?
Right.
And so I wrote it, turned that into to my editor, and at first she's like, "Hey, maybe we could release this as like a downloadable ebook in between the two novels and whatever." I'm like, "Oh, cool." So they took the board, and then they came back and they're like, "Well, we decided if you could write 3 more of these suckers, but we could release this as a book." So at first I was like, "Hey, great, that sounds awesome." But then I'm like, "How do I write 3 more stories about haunted manuscripts and stories and books and that don't sit on the same ground and are different but also connected?" And so it was really a fantastic exercise in extending my creativity to see what I can do. And I had a blast writing that book. It was so much fun.
It was really cool. I liked that. I liked that all the stories had that theme that kind of went through. Of each short story is basically about an evil book of some kind, like some sort of book that is messing with the people in the story. And I loved the one about the writer that was kind of hiding away in his cabin, and his agent thought that he was out there doing like cocaine and stuff, and she goes out there and there's this book that he's like barricaded in this room because he's like, that book is doing crazy stuff, I'm not gonna touch it. He's got it in like this box that he's nailed shut. And so I loved that one. And then I loved the one, I was gonna ask you about this, the one about the 2 brothers that were kind of like I don't know how you describe them, like fixers or like delivery guys for like the cartel and stuff.
They're like half-ass gangsters, basically.
Yeah. And I love those. There was some really, dude, I don't think this is like really spoiling anything, but when they start like going into the other place and it just kind of slowly fades over, he starts noticing that there's these abandoned gas stations that are stocked with food, but like food he's never heard of before. Dude, that whole transition, I loved that so much. And because I was like, as I'm reading it, I'm like, whoa, what is going on? And like trying to put the pieces together. And it was just you do such a good job with these environments and these situations that characters find themselves in, where you as the reader feel like something is just a little bit off, like the town in Bone White. Like you feel like something's just a little bit off with that town. The thing in that story about the brothers, you feel like that whole series of events, there's just something like a little off kilter about it, a little bit eerie. And then of course, like the bad guy in Black Mouth, you just feel that sense of wrongness. There's something there. And I don't know how you do it, but you make that come across really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just sort of sticking true to the characters and the situations that they're in, and to not go so totally overboard where the believability kind of gets shaken, And I had a lot of fun doing the ghostwritten stories because, number one, the whole book is sort of a metaphor for fiction, right? It's the power of literature. Like, literally, right? This is what all 4 of those stories are, literally the power of storytelling, right? That's what
right.
That's the conduit for all the stuff that happens in that book. And I had a lot of fun, just kind of pushing that to a limit where, all right, I could go this far, but it's still believable. And like if I do a good enough job with these characters, and I do a good enough job with the setting and the environment, and letting you believe you're in the real world, I can get away with more crazy shit as the story goes on, because the reader will carry through. And it's a dance, You've got to maneuver it a little bit, but that's part of the fun doing this stuff too. It's how can I keep them string alive? It's like fishing. It's like I'm going to slowly reel them in. If I'm too quick or hasty or gluttonous about what I'm doing, I'm going to fuck it up. But if I'm cautious and I suck you in and I rip, I'm going to catch you, motherfucker. I'm going to cook you up and eat you.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Man,
So great.
that is so cool to hear you talk about that. It's just, coming from, I've never written a book. I probably never will, but it's just one of those things that's like, it's hard to wrap my head around. And hearing you say stuff like that, it's so much more intrinsic than even I think, it comes to. So, I mean, just props to you, man. It's really pretty wild.
Totally.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Do you think will we ever see any full novella or full novels branch off of the ghost written stories? Like, I would love to see one about the two brothers, either a prequel or like following the events of that.
I'll give you my stock answer. I think those poor fellows have been through enough. What I would love to see, we've had a couple of meetings on this, is sort of a limited anthology series where every episode is a different haunted book story based sort of in that world. So that's kind of in the works, sort of.
Oh, cool.
But I'd love to see that. But as far I get very. I feel like I put all my characters really through the ringer. So by the time those books are done, I'm ready to say goodbye.
Like, yeah,
I think they're happy to be done with me.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of sequels and novels that branch off of other ones, I would love to ask you about The Night Parade. This is one of my favorite books of yours. I actually just reread it this week, and I would love to know: are we getting a sequel to that one? Because that, like, it kind of left us on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and I would love to know what happens next.
So my original intention was to have The Night Parade be a trilogy, and we follow Ellie through 3 different stages of her life, and to sort of a stand-esque showdown between her and an antagonist who's like the evil version of her. And I had this whole kind of thing planned out, but it just never came to fruition. The publishers didn't think it was a great idea, and the more distance I have between that novel, the more I kind of appreciate how it ends now. But no, you're right to think that it was initially planned as a trilogy in my head, at least. But I also don't know if doing that wouldn't just tread similar ground that's been done before. So I don't. I don't know. I guess time will tell. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I
that's
definitely got. Okay, good. That's good to know, because I was definitely like, man, I would love even just like a part 2 to this, or just to know like kind of where she goes from there. The ending, I actually finished my reread this morning, and the ending had me in tears, just like it did the first time. That is one of the most just saddest endings ever. But it's great. I love it.
Well, and I look at a book like that, and it's sort of like, if you understand what you're reading when you go into that book, then you can find that the ending satisfying in the perspective that you take. Like, so that book for me is a story about what a father's responsibility is to his child versus to humanity, and where do you what is your role? And I think that the answer comes at the end of the book when he makes that decision and understands what it really means, not just to be a father, but to also respect the desires of your kid, and to sort of capitulate to that to a degree. To me, that's closure. That's the character arc that ends the book for me, and I was happy with that. But that's really what it is. And when I came up with that idea, I mean, the whole conceit of the book is, there's this disease, and it was written before COVID and shit, but there's this disease.
That was one thing when I was reading it initially, I was like, when was this published? And I had to check.
Well, it's fucked up because I think it was published in like 2016, and I made, I had a friend who was an epidemiologist. I made made phone calls to the CDC, to the WHO, to all these people and said, hey, I'm looking for a death rate for a fictional disease that's going to grind polite society to a halt, but not totally decimate it. What numbers can you give me? And they gave me all this shit. And actually, it turned out to be the 0.05, whatever, was the COVID number. But they tell them, and they're like, yeah, but that'll never happen. You know, and I'm like, no, well, it's fiction. So years later, dude, I remember being in a restaurant. I picked up a newspaper because it was the week that Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, had died in that helicopter crash, whatever, with his kid. And I'm reading that story, and next to it is the fucking Wuhan, coronavirus thing. And I'm like, I'm reading this. So I start reading that. And I'm like, those are the fucking numbers they gave me. So like, I even at that time, I'm telling everybody, and I'm like, hey, I don't want to be that guy, and I'm not really like a paranoid kind of motherfucker. But I'm like, shit's gonna shut down, and I did. I pulled my kids out of school like 3 days before they shut the fucking schools down, because I'm like, this is so let's do it.
Yeah.
So it was scary as shit. But the thing about that novel was, when I first thought of that idea about what a father's responsibility is it for the good of mankind, or is it for the good of your child? And I told friends of mine the plot, and I had half of them say, hey, this guy's got to do the right thing for humanity, and the other half of the people said, no, fuck that, you got to do what's right for your kid. And because of that discrepancy, I'm like, I got to write this fucking book, because people that's what I want, that discussion, that argument of what's the right thing. Is he a bad guy or a good guy? And I love that, again, going back to character, I love that sense of balance or imbalance with the character, where you're like, is he even doing the right thing or the wrong thing? And I love a reader to come to their own determination with stuff like that.
Yeah, I was on David's side the whole way. And you wrote, the daughter, she's got her own ideas of, what she needs to do for humanity. And man, let me just say that you wrote a child so well, to the point where I was like, this is why I don't have kids. I was like, I loved how well written she was, but I'm like, dude, if I were the protagonist,
I thought you were gonna say something else for a second, dude.
I was like, I would have strangled her at this point, because it's so true to life on like how kids are, and I'm just like, but
well, but the trick with that is, and again, it was a bit of a learning process for me while I'm writing the book. Is the whole book started off as what this father's responsibility is to his daughter, where, if you want to call it a twist at the end is sort of, he never really takes into consideration what she wants for herself and for humanity.
Right.
And he has to acknowledge her own will in making it. It's a hard decision. I mean, and that's parenthood, man. And I wrote that book when I had kids for the first time, and I'm like, all those things you think about. It's like, you start becoming, as a parent, once you become a parent, you are the secondary character in the story of your own life. Yeah. Right? You are no longer the most important thing in your life.
I love that line in the book. Yeah.
And that is exactly how that book translates. And it was important to get that point across, because he's not the most important. He's a conduit. And that's a little bit of why I like ending it where I ended, because you recognize that there's not necessarily a bunch of closure in the extraneous storylines that surround David, but David's story's closed, and you recognize that, well, you're just really, this was a story of the conduit, not the main character. And there's some beauty in that to me. Maybe it's too much wine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hey, pour another glass, man.
Yeah.
Pour another glass.
No, 100%.
That's right. I got mine right here.
Yeah.
Well, not wine, but.
But yeah, I love the Night Parade so much. I was wondering, have you ever played The Last of Us?
Or maybe to start off, Are you a gamer?
I am so not a gamer that the three of us, spent, 20 minutes trying to figure out how to even get me to hook into this video chat.
Oh, yeah.
I don't.
So then the answer is no. He has not played The Last of Us.
No.
Okay.
I have not played The Last of Us. When the TV show came out, I had a bunch of friends call me up, like, you gotta watch this. It's like your book. Down to the characters' names. So I'm watching the show, I'm like, holy shit. So I did look up when it was made, and I saw that it was done from a video game, and I think there was a graphic novel at some point in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, it's fucking close. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, in my review, I told people if you like The Last of Us, you need to read The Night Parade, because it's like, it's not the exact same thing, but it's similar, like father-daughter dynamic. They're on the road in the apocalypse, and she's kind of she's like immune to it, and so they're like traveling together and trying to keep her away from the people that wanna use her. And so yeah, I'm a big fan of The Last of Us, and so I loved The Night Parade.
There's a strong inclination for readers to compare stuff that they read to other things, and for the longest time, The Night Parade got a comparison to Firestarter by Stephen King. And then once The Last of Us came out, they're like, oh, it's also The Last of Us. So like, well, how many things are you going to say that I ripped off?
That's right.
So, I don't know.
Yep. And that's the thing about, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's just that everybody's got everybody's going to come to you with something else, right? Like, oh, your book reminds me of this. Spencer will be different from me.
Right. And I never think that that's like a bad thing either.
No.
Like if I was an author, I would be inspired by a million different things and probably pull it all into my work. And so I actually really love it when authors are inspired by other things I like, because then it's just like, it's more of that thing that I already enjoy. And so I always really like when there's like a little bit of inspiration from something, but I'm always really surprised when I'm like, this author was definitely inspired by this, and then they tell me,
and then they weren't.
Like, no, I've never read that. Like,
yeah.
Like Zach Argyle.
You know what?
Oh, I was just gonna say, our friend Zach Argyle, he wrote the Threadlight trilogy, and I was like, oh, he's definitely read the Lightbringer series. This is exactly like that. And then we asked him, he's like, nope, I've never read any of Brent Weeks' work. And I'm like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, and I get a lot of, like, a book like Black Mouth. I get a lot of Stephen King's It comparisons to that book. But it's sort of like, well, the trope of childhood trauma coming back on adults is not just solely indicative of Stephen King's work. And actually, when I was writing that book, I was thinking more of like novels like The Children of Red Peak, or Todd Keesling's what's his book, Devil's Creek, stuff like that. Where they're all kind of in that same environment. But it's and I look, one of my biggest influences on my fiction is Peter Straub. I have never gotten this sounds like a Peter Straub. I'm like, all this shit is Peter Straub. I ingest Peter Straub and I spit out in a different way. So or Robert McCammon. People read like my book December Park, which is like a big coming of age. There's no supernatural elements to it, but everybody's like, oh, that's very similar to Stephen King's It as well. Stand By Me. I'm like, well, look, it's a book about kids growing up in the 90s, but that's what happened to me. It's almost an autobiography, but the secret there is it was actually inspired by Robert McCammon's Boys Life. So, people miss a lot of those, but, it is what it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
They become their own things, I think.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Man, it's too bad you don't play video games, because I think you would really like this one called Alan Wake. Have you heard of this at all?
So I've heard of that. I don't know what it's about, but I wrote a book years ago called Passenger about a guy who's got no memory, who wakes up on this bus and
because
I don't know what that has
it's
to do with
about
it.
it's about like a famous horror author who like goes on vacation to this place out in like the Pacific Northwest. He's going there with his wife, and she like tries to get him to finish his novel because he's got like writer's block. And as he's like writing this novel, there's like a bunch of different things going on, but as he's writing this novel, it's coming to life, and the town is becoming overrun by like these ghostly things that he's written into his book. And so it's pretty cool because like as you're going through the game, you're like going through this town and like having to kill all of these like dark entities that are coming at you, but you're also finding manuscript pages of a book that he didn't realize he wrote. And so you find these pages, and it'll say, you know, Alan walked into the lumber store, and as he got to the back, you know, the demon burst through the wall or whatever. And so you're like, oh, that's weird. And then maybe like a half hour later into the game or something, you'll end up in a lumber store, and that scene will play out. And so it's really interesting. It's a really creative game.
I knew coming into this that Spencer was going to tell you about Alan Wake. I knew that it was going to happen.
Well, you know what? So that's a perfect. So I don't know anything about it. I've never played the game, but like this is you talk about like the zeitgeist and shit up there. Like forever, I've been sitting on a story idea about it. The guy whose wife was a famous novelist who dies, and she's got this unfinished manuscript, and he wants to finish it for her and kind of end her trilogy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, but in the meantime, he gets somehow notified by this town that his wife grew up in that she's actually writing about, and all the stuff she wrote in her book actually has been manifesting in this town. So you talk about like similarities of all these kind of things, and I've always had something about that. So it interests me. I like stories about just people thrust into a situation out of their element, dealing with the irrational, but having that bit of heart to it that connects them to their humanity. I don't know. Everything I do is kind of have a bit of that to it.
Yeah. That's you should absolutely write that. I would totally read that. That sounds just up my alley. So I wanted to ask. I want to talk about Bone White in a bit, but before we get to that, I'm curious. Was there a particular book of yours where you started to see like a boost in popularity? Because I see your stuff recommended all over Reddit, all over the internet. Like before I even read Bone White, I had seen your name pop up a lot. And so I was wondering, is that like, was there a particular book where you started to see stuff like that happen?
There are a few, and they're kind of like milestones in the writing career. I mean, my book Snow was one of them. It was my first mass market major publishing company's book. That garnered a lot of attention. After that, I wrote a book called Floating Staircase. It was nominated for a Stoker Award. That kind of bumped me up to a different echelon. After that, White it would have been another one, and then Come With Me. Those are sort of the milestone books in my career that people seem to go to, and that I've recognized a change in my readership and what I'm doing based on those, the success of those books.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I was just about to read Floating Staircase this last week. I didn't have time to get to it, but it sounded really interesting. Guy keeps he's like sleepwalking, right? And he ends up finding this staircase that like rises out of the lake or something. Do I have that right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about Floating Staircase. I haven't read it, so I'm not going to give anything away. But the thing that I like the most about that book as a writer is there's two levels to read that novel. You could read it on the surface level and come away with a very happy, uh, you know, mystery novel ending. You know, that everything is tied up with a neat bow, and that's how you read your books. If you read it at a deeper level, you realize that that's not what I'm actually telling you, and this guy's in the story is fun. And it was all very deliberate, but it was a very delicate balance of writing this novel because I really wanted. And I've had readers read it and go, "Oh, I love that book." Yeah. Oh, they think the ending is happy. Then I have other readers go, "Well, I read their book. I love the book, and it's that ending made me cry because I got it."
Yeah.
It has two. It works on two levels. It was a very hard thing to follow,
Okay.
but it really was. That's the hallmark of that novel, is to show what, and the main character is a horror writer, so you can't be trusted right from the beginning with what he's telling you. So
Okay.
it was a lot of fun to do, but it was a very delicate balance to kind of get that point across.
Okay.
Totally. I've got
read
a
it. Let me know what you think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll have to reach out when I do.
I've got a quick question. I was just scrolling through Audible trying to see, what I've read and stuff, and the book The Ascent popped up, and the cover looks freaking awesome. And I kind of read through the thing, and I'm like, is that a supernatural book as well, or just a thriller? Or is it maybe kind of both?
A little bit of story in it, yeah. A little bit
Okay,
of both, yeah.
gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna read it. Looks pretty cool.
Nice.
Well, there you go. It's one of those books that never really hit like it's. I wanted it to.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. I've always admired climbing, and I like climbing. I love Everest and stories about climbing, so I think it'll be good for me.
Nice.
Well, the irony is, I wrote that entire book in a cinder block basement in my old house. So I wrote this thing from climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
You didn't write it at the top of a mountain overlooking
You weren't climbing
the valley?
K2 when you wrote that?
No.
Come on.
No. I'm not. First of all, I can't. I'll spill my beer. I can't fucking climb a mountain.
Yeah.
So I really, really want to talk about Bone White. This is one of my top 3 favorite horror novels of all time. Like I said, I've read it a couple times now, and I just absolutely love this book. One of my favorite, I guess, tropes in horror is the middle of nowhere small town where the main character gets there and all of the people that live there either want him gone or they want him to stay, like Wayward Pines, but they're all keeping secrets and you don't have all the information, and the more that the main character tries to push to get information, the more they're pushed away. I love that so much. There's something about just a really creepy middle of nowhere town where something is wrong but nobody will talk about it. And in the case of Bone White, you as the reader are trying to figure out, is Paul blowing all of this out of proportion in his head, or is there something actually wrong? And you don't really know until the very end, because people I think it was the sheriff or even the tow truck driver, they're like, dude, we're not lying to you. There's nothing going on. And part of you is like, that's bullshit. I know something's going on. And then another part of you is like, wait, what if there is nothing going on? What if it's just a misunderstanding, or Paul is going out of his mind and blowing all this out of proportion, and you don't know until the very end.
Yep.
And I loved that so much.
Yeah, keeps you on your toes the entire time. That's one thing that I noticed this last read through was the same thing you just said. Never knowing if our our guy Paul is crazy or not.
Right. And you're guessing at every single turn.
Yeah.
And I not to spoil anything, but there's a particular point in that book where you get a flashback to a boy that has a sheep's head mask,
Hmm.
and that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
time I read the book, it was sometime last year, and I was sitting in this room late at night, and I just had like, it was all dark, and just like that light was turned on. That was the only light in the room, and I was listening to that scene, and it I very rarely get that feeling where like I think I hear something in my house and I have to like get up and like look downstairs. And I'm like, wait, did I hear something or did I not hear something? It just like gets you just like that
Yeah.
on edge feeling where you don't feel like comfortable in your home. And that's what that scene did to me. And very, very, very few books have done that. So I love this book so much. I love the character of Paul. I love all of the characters in the town. I love how creepy the town is. And so I would love it if you can just tell us whatever you can about this book, just like the writing of it, where the idea came from, like whatever, because I love this book so much.
So, well, for one thing, probably the scene you described about the sheep's head mask. That's probably the emails and you know, messages I get from readers. That's the scene that scares me. Which
Yeah,
sort of, which I find
that's
validating
creepy.
because you know what, I wrote it in a particular way because I become aware that fiction is scariest when the author isn't describing a scene, but when another character tells the story. And if you
Yeah.
recall in the
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
that segment is a woman telling us. So I wanted to put it to the test and
Yes.
go, well, I'm going to do this, but I want to see if my theory is right, and I think it is. I think when you have another character and you're hearing the story from the lens of a person as opposed to this omnipotent author, there's something even
Right.
eerier about that, and it seems to hold true because everybody says that about that segment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially
I mean, that book
because
it's a,
the lady in
I
that
love.
scene. Oh, sorry. The lady in that scene who's telling that story, you can tell how unsettled she is and how she's like it talks about her like holding her glass and it's like shaking and she's like taking like big gulps of like whiskey while she's talking about it, and how just bringing it up again is bringing this like reaction in her, and how unsettled the sheriff is that's sitting across from her.
Yep.
Like just the interplay of those two characters sharing this really eerie moment where both of them feel unsettled by this story. You as the reader feel that and you're like, oh my god, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did. I wanted to, again, like I said, I wanted to put it to the test. Like, what were the scariest things that I ever read in a book when I was a kid? And both both two scariest scenes I could think of were both in Stephen King's Pet Cemetery, and they were both. One
Mm.
of them was a segment about Zelda, the sister with the twisted back, and the other segment in that book was Jed's story about Timmy Baterman who came back from the dead, right? And I'm looking at the book, I'm like, those are the two most terrifying things I've ever read. What makes them so scary aside from the story? Well, what makes them so scary is Stephen King is not narrating those scenes. It's the characters telling these stories
Yeah.
that
Right.
has this weird buffer between us and almost like King is not even in charge anymore. These characters are telling us.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
thought about that when I was writing this scene for this book, and I guess that fucking worked because people said the same thing about that scene. Maybe
Yep.
there's the secret to really scary shit. I don't know, we figured it out here
Yeah.
tonight on your
Yeah.
podcast.
You
But,
got it, man. You got the formula.
but that was it. I mean, the only other thing I could think about that book is, it took place in Alaska. I spent 2 weeks in Alaska trying to get a lay of the land a little bit.
Oh, cool.
Unless you like really live in a place, you don't know,
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
don't know much about it. So as I was writing the book, and a bunch of murders and everything, so I called up the Alaska Alaska State Troopers, and I said, I'm an author. I live in Maryland. I'm writing this book. How would you guys receive someone confessing to burying 8 bodies up by the Arctic Circle? And it was like along the phone. I could tell. I said, "Who's this guy?" So
Yeah.
it was a weird.
They're like, "Do you need to confess something?"
Subsequently, oh yeah, no doubt they were thinking that. But it turned into, I made like repeated phone calls to them. I'm like, hey, look, you can look me up on Amazon or whatever. I'm legit. I'm a real person, which was also a great, clever cover story. Whoever you serial killer, just be a writer. But so after I'd call these guys up and I'd be like, hey, yeah, I gotta this guy did X, Y, and Z, he blew somebody's head off, and now you're cleaning it up, and what you guys do? And they're like, hey, Ron, hey, we're all reading your books. Yeah, great. You can do this. So they gave me all this information.
Nice.
So it was pretty cool. Yeah.
That's cool.
That is really cool.
I'm doing the same thing right now. Yeah. I'm doing the same thing right now in the book I'm writing that takes place in Los Angeles County. So I made a phone call out to those guys and I'm like, hey, if somebody found a body in the Mojave Desert, how would you guys respond? And the guy laughs on the phone. He goes, oh, you mean like every other week when they find a body? And I didn't realize it was that. Wow.
Yeah, it's that bad out there.
It's better than what I'm writing. Holy shit. Yeah. Those are things. I also learned that, I went up, I got in touch with a bunch of people I knew who lived in Alaska when I was writing about life. They gave me all these great anecdotes about growing up there and stuff they'd seen. It was wonderful. I put it all in the book. But then you're always going to have one slip up. And I got an email from one person one time said, hey, on page whatever, you have so-and-so going and getting a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. Well, Dunkin' Donuts doesn't exist in Alaska.
Oh, no.
Like, all right, I need to fix that.
There's always something. And I never changed it. I just left it in all the reprints. I'm like, leave it in there. Let's keep it in there.
Yeah.
That's so great. Yeah, what about I guess just like the planning leading up to that book, like where was there like a particular time where this idea popped into your head, or was it just like happen over time, or? You know what? It's what started the idea for this story turned out to not be anything about the story, but there was I remember watching a news broadcast about a guy that they arrested who was a former police officer, but was also a serial killer. They called him Cannibal Cop. And I watched this storyline, and that was really the first thing that got me thinking about this book. And I'm like, we're going to take this story, this police officer who's doing this heinous shit, and where would that go? And that kind of became a more broader look about humanity in general. And when you get deep into the book and you realize what the brothers and what one brother is doing out in the woods, it became at what point do you surrender your humanity to do things you think are for the greater good and that sort of thing. So that's kind of what was the trigger for it. I'm sure I have about 40 different first chapters of Bone White that all deal with cannibal cops, but it changed gears as we went. Okay, that's cool. I loved the brother relationship in Bone White, because I have a brother, and we don't have like quite the same like relationship, but I can see similarities between me and my brother to Paul and Danny. And he talks about, we used to talk all the time when we were younger, and then we kind of slowly stopped talking, less and less, and then we just like hadn't talked for years. And it really made me think, like, I need to text my brother because I haven't talked to him in a while, and I don't know exactly where he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's the human element of stories that I'm talking about. It's like, I've got 2 brothers, and I'm very close with them, and sometimes I'm the Danny in a relationship with them, sometimes I'm the Paul in a relationship with them.
Sure.
And I like to explore those elements of what that means. And loyalty and responsibility that comes with having a relationship like that, right? It's sort of this weird, they're not your children, your siblings. You didn't plan to have them. They're there. They exist. They're part of your blood. And what does that mean for what your responsibility is for those people?
Yeah.
And that's again, that's for me, that's what's interesting in exploring the storylines. I mean, Bone White as a novel wouldn't exist if Paul was the kind of guy who said, "Fuck it, I don't care." Right?
Yeah,
he's not,
totally.
and he feels some stewardship. He feels some stewardship to his brother, and that's what really propels the whole story. And I think that's a strong driving factor in the novel. Just that ownership of humanity.
Right. That's awesome. Do you ever think about, like, do you have like a head canon in, like, for where Paul went after the story? Like, did he like go back home and try to live a normal life, or do you have any like head canon for that?
No, like I said, I'm done with the book. I'm sort of done with the book.
Yeah.
I think Paul's story was sort of resolved. Although I will say this, so I had a book come out this past year called Big Luck. It was a collection of novellas.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was a novella called Skull Belly, and in it is this sort of slovenly private detective who meets up with a Pacific Northwest police detective to solve this case. And I always liked him as a character. She was okay, but I always thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have this guy pop up again in a different sort of X-Files scenario, only dealing with Ryerson, the detective from
Yeah.
Put those two together. So that's always kind of been a little in the back of my head. But cool. I'm very I'm always very conscious of fucking up what I've done before by doing something after. So
Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
Sure. Well, yeah, but I mean, Bone White had a fantastic ending. That's one that I like. Just as a reader, I'm like, yeah, that one doesn't need a sequel. Like, it was wrapped up really nicely. I was really, really satisfied with the ending, and I love that book so much. That's one that I'll be rereading for many years to come, for sure. I wanted to ask, have you ever read, just because these are two of my other favorite horror books, and I think you would like them, have you ever read Netherwell Horror by Lee Mountford or Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell?
I've never read either one, but I'm familiar with Stolen Tongues from Facebook groups and stuff people talk about.
Yeah.
Nice.
That
was my, like, one of my favorite books from last year was Stolen Tongues.
Yeah, that was in our top 5.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I think you would really like it. I don't know if you do audiobooks, but I would really recommend the audiobook, because there's like voices, like the bad thing has like a very creepy voice, and so I always recommend the audiobook for that. And then I also wanted to recommend Netherwell Horror because it's a little bit more Lovecraftian. It's almost kind of similar to Bone White in that a sister comes out to this random like fishing town looking for her brother who's gone missing, and there's kind of like this whole Lovecraftian thing that happens while she's there, but it's the same kind of thing where it's a small town. She gets out there and no one wants to tell her anything. People are like outright lying to her and like trying to get her to go away. Some people are trying to keep her there. And so it's this whole web of intrigue and figuring out what's really going on. And so I think you would really, really like that one. That's another favorite of mine for sure.
Great. Yeah, I'll check it out.
I saw an article somewhere. I don't know if this is still happening. Was Amazon making a series for Bone White? Did I see this in an article somewhere?
Yeah, that was going on for a while. basically COVID killed that whole deal. So
Oh no.
Bummer.
yeah, they got pretty far. I read the scripts for it. I had nothing to do with it. I read the
Yeah,
scripts. The guy, it looked really good. It looked like it was going to take off. Fox 21 picked it up, and Disney bought out Fox, and then Disney picked it up, and Disney sold it to Amazon Studios. And I thought, it's
Oh
great.
shoot.
And in the process, so my film agent wound up. We had Bone White, we had Come With Me under option with NBC Universal, and we had Small Town Horror, which is the book coming out in June, under option, also with Fox and Disney. All three at once, and one by one, they all just fucking fell apart. So it's kind of a disheartening period of time. But no, it was a good experience. It was cool. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
But there's a few things currently in the pipeline. I'm hoping one will take off. There's always somebody working on something.
Yep.
Right.
I'm hoping to announce a feature film coming out soon, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be awesome. Doing some of my rereads this last week, because I did this last week. I read the We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone and Night Parade and Bone White. I reread those, and every time I finished one of them, I was like, man, these would be such great movies or TV shows. Like the pacing of them and just the way that they're set up is so perfect for an adaptation. I think they would be really, really good.
I feel like it's really hard for like readers, and I'm sure authors also, because like I know that Bone White would make an incredible movie or a show or anything of the sort, but it's like it's all about the money. Where's the money? It's just gonna make us millions and millions and millions of dollars. If it's not, we can't do it.
Yeah.
It's like it will. Like it'll be a great story. You just have to do it. But
you just have to do
if the money's not there to start, like if they're not sure they're gonna make so much money, it's never even an option.
Yeah, it's tough, especially too.
I was just saying, even recently with the last season of True Detective, with Jodie Foster and everything. I got so much in emails and stuff about from newspapers or magazines or whatever. Like, we want to feature Bowie as if you liked this series, you'll like. I'm like 40 people have said that. Just fucking make the book a series.
Yeah. It's tough, especially and you see some of these books that get adaptations, and it's like, why the fuck did that book get an adaptation? Like, that's such a weird, like, random thing that, and some of them end up doing really good, and some of them end up totally flopping. And it's like, man, some of these executives at Amazon and HBO and stuff.
It's just the people with power, man. That's all it is. The people, if somebody with a lot of power like Bone White, there'd be a movie about it.
Right.
It's just...
It sucks, because it's like, man, if you guys... Because, like, the executives, they just look at this like...
it's all business. It's just cash flow.
They look at the numbers, right?
Yeah.
They're like, how big of an audience does this have? How many, like, has it sold recently? Is there a lot of hype around it? And so it's really hard to get older books made into TV shows, because they're looking at books like A Court of Thorns and Roses or Fourth Wing, or like whatever the big like Barnes and Noble seller is now, right? And so it's kind of a bummer, because it's like, guys, there's so many good books out there that you're completely missing, just because you're just looking at numbers. And like, I have no doubt that if they made Bone White or like Black Tongue or anything into a series, it would be popular in the same way that like a what was the one I was thinking of, like Silo or something, or like a Reacher, like something that would be like a good series that people would binge. It'd be a ton of fun. So
yeah, I've always told myself, if I ever win the lottery, one of the things I'm gonna do is I'm gonna front the money. I'm gonna fund a movie, from a book of my choice, right?
Yeah. That'd be awesome. That'd be great.
Well, I hope you win the lottery. Sounds good.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Bone White would be high on my list.
Oh, let's see. What else do I have here? Um, what are your favorite some of your favorite bits of media? Like, do you have any like favorite shows or favorite books that you would recommend to people? Just stuff
Oh
you enjoy?
no, not really. You know what have I read lately that I really enjoyed? Um, uh, I've read like I think we were talking about it before. Josh Ballin's latest collection. I haven't read his new book yet, but it's been a blanket.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Um, Philip Fracassi, he's always doing good work. Rebecca Rowland's got a collection out called White Trash and Recycled Nightmares, which is some of the best short stories I've read all year.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to think what else really just kind of blew me away.
Sure. Have you been watching any like TV shows?
Yeah, what about
or
like
yeah.
movies? Like, are you like, do you like Harry Potter
I'm
or
so
stuff
weird.
like?
I actually hate TV shows. I don't watch
Okay.
TV shows, which is weird.
Fair.
because
That's fair.
I write for them, but yeah.
Not fair.
Yeah.
You know,
No, that's
I
fair.
put on- I
Everybody's
put on,
entitled
like-
to their own opinion.
I put on like stand-up comedy and I fall asleep halfway through it. I'll watch
Okay,
like
yeah.
fucking
Nice.
Back to the Future, and I fall asleep watching that. You know, I don't know. I can't think of anything. What was the last movie I really liked? I can't remember. I watched I watched Poor Things after the Academy Awards just because I didn't know anything about it. And what's her face won the Oscar? I'm like, oh, what's this? And it was Little Frankenstein. Looked kind of cool. It was good.
Yep.
Okay.
But man. You know what? I'm mostly. You know what? I read a lot, but I read a lot for peers of mine, like blurbs from
Yeah.
books and stuff like that. And they're all good. I listen to a lot of music. I'm a big music guy. But, you know, like, I don't know. I haven't stayed awake. I watched Oppenheimer. It took me 3 fucking nights to watch that whole movie. I'm sure it's great.
That's fair.
I'm sure
fair.
if you watch it, it's
That is
great.
fair.
But I'm
That's a big movie.
Motherfucker.
That's a big movie. Yeah, that's a big movie.
and I already know what it's about. Like, I'm not going in and going, oh, this guy
Yeah.
knows a vampire. No,
Yeah, we're well aware
That
of
doesn't
everything
happen.
that took place here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, whatever. I don't know. I'm getting old, fellas. I don't know what to say.
Hey, it's all
Sure.
good, man.
So,
That's one
yeah,
thing that
that's fair.
I've noticed that everybody, everybody's different. I've met plenty of people that don't consume TV or media that way, but they do it in other ways. And I think, in my opinion, books is the best way to consume media. Period. It's by far the healthiest, and it's the most like in depth. I don't know. I wish I
Yeah.
could read more books, like paperback books, because I don't do that really at all. I'm all Audible. But my fiance is very much into reading, and she'll sit down and she'll read herself to sleep at night. I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. Like, I wish I could just sit down and read a book for an hour and a half and go to sleep. But I'm not geared that way.
I wish I could just sleep at night. That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. That's what this is for, my friend.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay, well, I have one more question for us before we kind of start to wrap up with like final thoughts and stuff. And if you don't mind me asking, like a little bit of a personal question, writing horror novels, a lot of it is so dark, especially something like We Should Have Left Well Enough Alone. Does that ever like take a toll on you mentally, like writing that? Because I know we've interviewed authors, and no horror authors. We've interviewed a lot of like fantasy authors, and they've talked about how they've had to really get into a character's head, and they've kind of had to sit in this world that they're building for a long time, and that's kind of their life day in and day out. Does writing horror ever have an effect on you, or is it kind of like or is it like separated from your life entirely, like in your day-to-day life?
Well, it's sort of like it's. I wouldn't say so much writing horror as it is just writing. Writing is very draining. I'm in a zone when I write, and it affects the people around me, and I recognize that. Writing horror sometimes it's actually a bit of an exorcism, so you feel a little bit better depending on what it is that you're writing about. The only time I ever really had that issue was years ago. I wrote a novella called. It was supposed to be a novel, but it was called The Morning House, and it's about this guy who is in a car wreck that winds up killing his wife and his baby. And he survives it, and he just kind of he's a doctor, but he gives up his profession and just kind of travels the country and finds this old abandoned house, and he buys it, and he fixes it up. He realizes that if he peels all the walls down and rips up the floor and everything, his old house is underneath this new house. And the more he gets it looking like his old house, the closer his dead wife and kid will come back to him. It was originally going to be a novel, and I wound up. I wrote it, and it was published as a novella. But I got to a point where I'm like, it's so dark. I can't spend half a year in this story. It's just too much. It's the only thing I think I ever wrote where I just kind of said, all right, I think we're done here. It's a little heavy.
Yeah, but, totally.
Dang.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I love the scary shit, so it's sort of like it doesn't freak me out and does whatever. I love the part that kind of is a little bit of a depressant is the actual writing process. Writing is fucking hard, fellas, and it's I love to have written, but writing is hard.
Yeah.
But,
I know.
Yeah.
I've had this idea for a story in my head for a while now, and every time I think about like sitting down to like try to like make some amateur outline or whatever, I'm just like, God, it would take so much time. It would take so much time to do it, and I just can't.
Yep.
Yeah, so I always.
Well, I think that's the kind of thing, like like if you work in a job, and if you could just write like a couple sentences a day, right? Like just start somewhere real small and see what happens.
Yeah, just as kind of like a exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Just see what you're capable of.
Right. All right, guys. Well, what are you looking forward to most this year? Are you like, obviously your book is coming out. We're all super excited about that. I'll be reading that day one. Is there anything else that's coming out this year? Anything from other authors that you're looking forward to reading or whatever?
I mean, that's the big thing for me is Small Town Horror comes out June 4th. I'm doing a big push for the book. I'm doing the US
Hey, that's
tour,
like my birthday's June 5th.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
That's awesome.
Well,
that's cool.
Yeah, well, hey, happy birthday.
There you go. Thank you.
I'm starting in San Diego and making my way back east. And, man, I'm hoping everybody just embraces the book and we'll see what we can do.
That's
Awesome.
cool. You're doing a signing
That sounds
tour?
so sad. I'm doing a signing tour.
No, it doesn't.
I'm doing a juggling tour. If you want to come and I did you the bar, I'll do that too. It's fine. Whatever.
Are you you said you're starting in LA? Are you going will you be making a stop in Spokane?
I'm starting in San possibly. I'm starting in San Diego and I got a week.
You should, because then I'll be there.
Run, so
yeah.
Okay, well, shit. That's one.
You better get to Spokane, dude, because I'll be there. All right?
That's it.
Do it.
That's worth.
That'd be so much fun.
We'll do that.
No, that's a little short drive for me, man. I'll be there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right. Well, you know what? Shoot me an email.
No, I'm messing with you, man. I know how it is. I know how it goes. It's all good.
All right, well, that is kind of what we got for today, boys. I sincerely want to thank you for coming and hanging out with us. We've we've enjoyed your books so much, and it's just been fantastic to be able to like sit down with you and pick your brain and kind of shoot the shit a little bit, and just hang out for an hour and a half. It's been a lot of fun.
Yep.
This was great. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah,
for sure. Any last minute thoughts or questions from you, Gabe? Anything up in the noggin today? Okay.
No, nothing up. There's nothing up there ever. So I don't know why you think that there's something up there now.
A man can hope.
Yeah, man can hope, but there's nothing up there.
All right, everyone. Well, that is gonna wrap us up for today. Go check out Ronald Malfi's books. I'll have all his stuff linked in the description. Obviously, we at the Fantasy Files recommend his works, and they're so much fun to binge. Go grab Bone White or one of the others, pre-order Small Town Horror, and fall down the rabbit hole with us. Let us know down in the comments what your favorite Malfi book is, or if we've convinced you to give them a try if you've never tried them before. But yeah, other than that, you can reach out to us on Twitter or Discord, of course, which is linked in the description. Or if you'd like to support us, Patreon or subscribing is the best way to do that. With Patreon, you get exclusive content every single... I guess now it'll be every single week. Like every Sunday, we'll have a live episode for you if you would like to catch it there, if you back us at the $6 tier and above. But even if you're at the lower tier, then you also get some extra content that Gabe and I put out there called Fantasy Files After Dark. So it's great stuff. It's just Gabe and I dicking around talking about anything.
Dipshits all the time.
Yeah, just being idiots. But yeah, if you can't do that, that's totally fine. Subscribing and liking this video on YouTube is such an awesome way to support us. It really helps get engagement for the videos and helps the algorithm pick us up a little bit more. And then what we have coming up is a Creators Corner episode featuring Bryce from Shelf Centered. And in early May, we will finally be going back to Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere with Warbreaker. And from there, we'll be going straight into Stormlight Archive, and we're really, really excited about that. We'll actually be doing the Warbreaker episode with Bookborn, so that'll be a fun guest to have on. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, Gabe and I will be taking a little vacation to Dread's Hand, Alaska. So wish us luck.
Mm.